Hello there, welcome to 345 Tech Talks podcast. Today we've got a special guest, Andrew Burgess from Greenhouse Intelligent, who is a leading AI expert, one of the top AI experts in the UK. And we're going to talk about AI, but particularly in the sort of property, social housing, rented housing sector. So Andrew, hello.
Hi Andrew, how you doing?
I'm good. So do you want to just so for the benefit of our many discerning viewers, we'd like to just tell a little bit about yourself and what you do and the types of things you're involved in.
Yeah, thanks Andrew. Yeah, so I'm an independent advisor on artificial intelligence. So what that means is I help organizations get the most value from AI, and this is quite a complex technology. It's quite nascent. People don't really understand it. They don't know how to start the journey with AI. So I kind of help them do all those things, understand what it is, how to start the journey, etc., and then help them bring in the right technologies, the right people, etc., to kind of implement that. So I'm not a data scientist myself. I rely on people much cleverer than me to do all that sort of work. But there's a really key point at the beginning about understanding where you want to go, and we can talk a little bit about that in a minute. The other things in terms of what I do, I'm a strategic advisor for some businesses, some particularly startup tech businesses, etc. And I've written a book called The Executive Guide to Artificial Intelligence.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the
perfect.
In the notes.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was published about a year and a half ago, Palgrave Macmillan, which is really a guide for business executives to understand AI and about how to start their journey. So non-technical language, essentially. I also write for a number of journals, magazines, etc. When we were allowed to, I used to do quite a bit of speaking at conferences. Obviously, a lot of things now,
remember that.
Yes,
like they used to in the olden days. Yeah,
that's right. So a lot of obviously podcast, webinar type things now, and I'm visiting senior fellow in RPA and AI at Loughborough University at their business school, and also expert in residence at Imperial College for Enterprise Lab as well.
Fantastic. No, that's great. So we're going to talk about AI in kind of social housing, rented property. But the thing that's funny about that, and I know you do work with charities as well, but it's not, when you've got not-for-profit, there's kind of a different set of drivers behind it. It's not just cut costs and increase sales that most businesses are worried about. There's a whole set of different drivers. So what are some of the sort of the big, what's the sort of difference in that from a business perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, even within that phrase social housing, you've got almost conflicting things, haven't you? You've got, the housing piece. So you've got, the landlord type relationship with your tenant. So, and that's because
that's still a business, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, you have costs, you have rent coming in, you have to make sure people pay the rent, etc. So that's, that's your classic capitalist organization there in one. But then you've got the social side, and this is where the not-for-profit piece comes in, and they need to protect their tenants. They need to provide them with housing that they may not necessarily be able to afford otherwise. So you've got these huge conflicting
and there's sort of regulatory requirements on them as well, isn't there? For them to be classed as not-for-profit, they have to meet regulatory requirements as well.
Exactly, yeah. So that essentially they are outsourced organizations from the local councils. So all of the issues that local councils have, or all the regulations local councils have, kind of get passed on to the housing associations for them to manage as well. So there's lots of things that they have to do as well. So it's a very interesting and challenging place to be. But it's, for me, is what surprised me when I first started working in the sector was the element, that social element, because people really focus on that now. And
there's a big ethos within that, isn't there? But you don't work in it unless you believe in the ethos.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, it's not just about, you know, we've got some houses and we rent them out and we get some rent in. It is about, you know, being on the front line. It's about the neighbourhood teams. Those are kind of the real heroes of the social housing sector.
Yeah.
The people that are running the neighbourhood offices, that are helping people, that are, you know, going around every day talking to people, you know, and a lot of these are elderly or vulnerable, etc. So, you know, they almost provide social care elements in the work that they do as well. So yeah, it's fascinating.
And so, given that, I mean, like you say, you've got the actual renting stuff out, renting houses out, and that's being a landlord, and that's kind of the business part, and then you've got the other part. But what are the kind of some of the, just broad brush at the you know, we can drill into detail later, but just at a very high level, what are some of the kind of the main areas where AI is becoming an important technology in this sector?
Yeah, so right now, you know, we're in the, I was going to say the middle of a pandemic. Hopefully we're
towards the end.
Yes, but you know, we're still under big restrictions, and you know, the key thing we've got coming up very soon is the end of furlough in the UK here. Yep. So that means that a lot of people who are have some level of protection on their income will have that removed, and you know, we're expecting unemployment to go up, etc. So you can expect then for rent arrears to go up, as well as people that are only paying their arrears through their furlough money. So there's this big kind of cliff face coming up. So you know, the biggest challenge for housing associations right now is rent arrears, and you know, we've seen it climb over the last year anyway. It is getting worse, but it will get much worse. So in answer to the AI question, is can we use AI to predict when people are going to go into an arrears position before they go into the arrears position? There's lots of work being done on, you know, people that have gone into arrears, and you know, there's a management process, there's steps that people take, but once you're in arrears, that's where the stress starts, you know, and the anxiety, and you know, it can be a very slippery slope down to what could end up with homelessness if it's not managed well enough, you know, and there's courts and legal actions, etc. within that. So if you can stop people getting into that position in the first place,
if you can provide support before the problem starts snowballing, then
almost before they even know it. And I know that sounds a little bit sort of Minority Report, but it's, you know, that's the ideal situation. So what we're looking at with a couple of housing associations I'm working with at the moment is building models to predict this rent arrears. So ideally it will say next month these tenants are likely to go into rent arrears, and the value for the housing association is then you can intervene early, and you know, you don't have to go in, you know, hard or with any bad messaging or whatever, because they're not in arrears yet, but it could be more educational, informational type stuff. So you know, around their universal credit or whatever it might be, but a very gentle approach, and to stop them getting to that position. So that's kind of the idea, and we're using, obviously, you know, so just to kind of explain AI, and you know, I think it's just a couple of words on that. You know, the way that AI works, a lot of machine learning algorithms work in terms of predicting stuff is they take historical data and they learn the patterns within that data to then predict what's going to happen next, essentially. So you need lots of training data, and particularly, you know, where there's been some outcome. So, you know, in our case, are they in arrears or not in arrears, and looking at what's influenced that. But you know, the great thing about AI is essentially an unsupervised learning approach here. You don't need to point the AI at all, saying, well, you know, it's this and this are the things that are the signal to put that make the person go into rent arrears. The AI will work that out itself. It kind of does it naive,
because you can look at you can feed in as many parameters as you've got, and then the ones that are significant will be the ones that end up emerging as influencing the result.
Exactly, and they could be non-linear as well. So it's not just a case around their earnings or whatever. The earnings could be influential, but that might depend on how many children they have or the sorts of apartment they have. So there's all these non-linear relationships happening, but the AI kind of works all that out. From the machine learning part of this, to then find the signal within that to predict who's going to enter arrears. So that's what we're kind of building at the moment. But we're looking at. We've got 7 years worth of rent payment data. We've got the tenant demographics. We've got the property details. We've got the tenancy details. So there's a lot of information that we're flowing into that as well to build these models. And sorry,
that's always the interesting thing, isn't it? It's I mean, where one of the things I find fascinating is always the data that goes into it. What are the different data sets that are available, and what combination of those are going to be able to produce something meaningful. Yes. And sometimes they're surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, for rent, maybe it's it's things like the demographics, the property demographics, the type of properties people are in, the age of properties, and there's also the possibly, occupational, what occupations people have.
Yeah.
And then. And then obviously their history. But is there any, aside from that, are there any other kind of interesting data sets that you wouldn't expect?
Well, I mean, this is how this is the art of data science, isn't it? So ideally, you would be saying, well, we'll just check everything in. We'll find all the data sets we can, no matter how obscure we think they are. We'll chuck them in, and AI will work it out, and it would. But you're going to waste a lot of time because you need to understand these data sets. You probably need to clean them a little bit as well. You need to format them. There's the compute power to do this as well. That's not an insignificant thing to do. Yeah. So the role of the data scientist is to understand what's a good level of data that I can put in, so I'm going to get something out of it, but I'm not wasting my time out of it. But the interesting thing comes in when you're bringing in external databases as well. So you could look at the number of ASBs, antisocial behaviour orders within that particular area. Even something like the weather or the traffic, or any of these sorts of things as well might be useful in some regard to that.
Or pollution, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So those that's where it gets interesting. So as an organization, they think about, well, this is the data set we've got, but can we enrich it? Can we bring other stuff in that's going to actually add to the mix as well?
But it's interesting what you say about data volumes as well, because you kind of think that everyone would kind of assume that more data is better, and in some ways it is from a purely from a scientific point of view.
Yes,
more data is better, but particularly with a lot of complex models, the compute power goes up exponentially with data. It's not a linear. It doesn't go linearly with data. It goes up exponentially, particularly in terms of the number of parameters you're feeding in.
Yes,
it's so it's fairly more linear with the number of items, but like I say, the more rows you've got, that's fairly linear, but the number of columns you've got, that's kind of an exponential increase in compute power.
Absolutely. And with housing associations, it's not going to be massive. It's not, we're not cutting edge research. I'm doing some work with a charity on Parkinson's research, and some of the data we've got there, the spreadsheets that are coming through are data, like 10 gigabytes each. That's when you're starting to get large. With housing associations, it's not going to be too large, but it does take time to run through all these. And as you're tuning and tweaking the models, again, that takes time, and the more data you have, the more thinking you have to do about it. There's more features to optimize, etc. So lots of different things you have to kind of take into account when you beyond just model building. And it's worth saying as well, just the acquisition of the data is usually the most time consuming in any AI project. There's kind of almost an 80-20 rule, that 80% of the time is getting the data and 20% is building the model, and that's not far off the truth, to be honest. And a lot of that is
getting hold of data, cleaning it,
getting
in the right format.
Yeah, and even just, there's the governance side as well. So, I say, well, I'll provide a list of here's the data that I think we need out of it, just as I described before, those sorts of things. The client organization then has to say, right, where is that data? What format is it in? How do we get it out? What permissions do we need? Do we need to anonymize it? Or, probably will need to anonymize it in that respect as well. Think about the GDPR issues, protective characteristics, all of those.
Yeah.
And there's usually, there's more and more people get involved in that process as well. So before I can even see the data, there's weeks have gone past just making sure that we we got the right things in place as well. So it's a can be a laborious process, but as you say, once you've done that, and particularly with one client, because we only talked about rent arrears, but the next project we'll do, we've kind of got all that sorted. So it's kind of, and we might have a lot of the data anyway, like the tenant data.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about predicting repairs on properties, which I'm doing with another housing association.
Yeah, because that was where I was kind of going to go next, because obviously rent is one big thing, but one of the things that everyone's getting excited about at the moment is just like, hey, the sensors for everything.
Yes.
And so we can monitor. There's like proximity sensors to sort of say whether people are there or not. There's the obviously measuring temperature, humidity in different rooms. There's smart meters. There's
carbon monoxide and
monoxide,
whether doors open or not, whether windows open.
Yeah, so there's suddenly all these sensors are available, and they can potentially, if you're not careful, you can end up sort of measuring stuff every millisecond. For on 100 sensors on tens of thousands of properties, and then you just end up with this massive, that's massive data. But so you mentioned sort of predicting repairs. I mean, that's a good kind of example of where sensor data kind of feeds into that. So what are some examples of the way you go about predicting repairs?
So it's worth saying it's you don't necessarily need the sensor data in place. So you can start relatively simply by looking at the life cycle, the lifetime of your assets. So if you say a kitchen is meant to last 18 years, so you'd be replacing the kitchen every 18 years or so. Is that correct? Or could it be 17 years or 15 years or whatever, or is it too short? So there's all these questions. So again, can we use the data to start to measure these things, and then you can put in predictive maintenance as well, and that goes through from kind of those major assets down to boilers and taps and things like that as well. So that's before you've even started to look at sensors. So that's just using.
So just basically, this thing is this old, and therefore I know that there's a good chance that it's going to fall apart. And then you can then some of the questions that follow on from that is, is it actually going to be cheaper to replace the kitchen earlier?
Yes.
If you spend the last few years just fixing things all the time, whereas it may be that actually the investment is, or it could be the other way around. It could be actually we can extend the life of these things because we've got to do a few repairs, but in terms of the cost, that's
absolutely.
And those I mean, obviously you've got the cost of capital of on houses, but apart from that, repairs are one of the biggest. They're one of the biggest costs, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's huge investment programs every year to look at the whole budgeting processes around this. What do we need to replace? What do we need to improve, etc. Roofs as well. Yes, another big one. So if you can tweak that a little bit, then there's potentially huge savings. So so I think there's definitely value there. Once you start looking at sensors and the Internet of Things, IoT devices, I think that's where it gets really exciting. And I've said before, if I was running a housing association, I'd be going all in onto IoT devices, because that's where the real value is going to come. And appreciate that it's expensive. There's lots of investment to do, and if you've got tens of thousands of properties, then you're not going to be able to do it overnight. But there's that old saying. I think Napoleon wanted to build line the road from Nice to Paris with poplar trees or something like that, and his general said, well, that's going to take ages. So we have no time to lose. And I think it's the same with IoT. You need to start now, because if you don't start, then you're going to be behind. So doing trials in 100 properties or whatever, I think is really important. And all those sensors that you talked about, there's the immediate thing. So if you've got motion sensors, so if you've got elderly tenants, motion sensors can be really useful for that, because you can see whether they're still moving, potentially whether they've had a fall, etc. All that's really great. So there's the immediate benefit of doing that, and there's no AI within that, but the AI comes in looking at that over time. So you might be looking at the patterns that person has, their movement, their electricity usage. They're always boiling the kettle at 8 a.m. in the morning, making a cup of tea, and anything that is anomalous to that, then the AI can start to pick up and maybe flag some things as well. So I think there's all of those areas. You have to be careful of the privacy angle here. Not everyone wants a movement sensor in their house that's being monitored by their landlord. So there are specific needs within this, but humidity is another good one, where humidity is a big cause of repairs. Yeah,
because if you get damp in the house, then
exactly,
and the worse that gets, and the longer it goes on for, then it can cause huge amounts of damage, can't it? So
absolutely, and the property itself will have a bearing on how humid it is, but also the tenant behaviour as well. So if they're always doing the washing and hanging up their towels within the kitchen to dry, for example, and they're doing that, if they've got young children, maybe they're doing that very, very often, that's going to get very, very humid and damp, and it's eventually going to have a long-term impact on that room. So those are the sorts of things. So then, the interventions are quite, educational about, if you keep doing this, and this is what's going to happen. So you need to think about different, washing line, or different ways of doing it. Assuming you've got some outside space, but you have to think about different ways of doing it. But that's where the benefits will come in. So you've stopped a big damp proofing issue there with that particular property. So
and the other thing was, I mean, it's like with a lot of AI that if you get the data, if you're measuring the data, that there will be value that you can, that later on there'll be more questions you can ask.
Yes.
But you need to capture those things first, and then you can, and then just go through and say, well, what, like you say, what about damp? What about, whether people, how can we assess people's health? How can we assess, all these other things? They come later, but you've got to get the sensors. But with those sensors, is it better? Because, like you say, this whole thing about lining the trees from Paris to Nice, or whatever it was, is it best to start with one poplar every mile and do the whole thing, and then fill the gaps? As in, do you put a few do you sort of do a few sensors over your whole estate, or is it better to just to do to do each house properly, and then you build up a set of a subset that's got a lot of data on them? Or is it best to have this spread across everything? What's the kind of the biggest value you get from that?
I don't think there's any one right answer. It'll depend on the particular housing association. But I've been having exactly these conversations with one of my clients already, and they want to do a trial with 100 properties, and they got a certain budget, and they were looking at temperature, humidity, and movement. So one sensor that kind of manages all those. So they were, exactly the same thing. Well, the movement bit is really only relevant where there's some safety justification within that. So elderly tenants, for example. So you don't necessarily want to look at movement everywhere. So do you ignore that, or do you do like 50 with movement and 50 with temperature, humidity? But then we're thinking, the other thing, you think, well, the the temperature piece will become irrelevant in a few months because it's the summertime, so people won't have their heating on. So there's no point in doing a trial on IoT on heating systems over the summer. So you've got to wait now until until we get into autumn as well. So there's all these different ideas, but you've got to think what you're trying to do with it. What's the particular challenges within your organization that you want to do? So if the program is built around safety and the social aspects of it, then you might want to be focusing on your more vulnerable tenants. If it's around cost savings and reducing repairs, then it's going to be around some of those other things. Maybe IoT sensors within the boilers, for example, to predicting when they're going to be failing, etc. Leaks, leak sensors, those sorts of things as well are really useful. So yeah, it does depend. So I wouldn't like to give one answer.
But like I say, it's always the when we talk about this, we always start with sort of ask the right questions. Ask the questions that what's the most important thing, and then everything else flows from there, rather than what can we do.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the challenge with these kind of disruptive technologies. Talk about AI and IoT and chatbots and things like that. Everyone thinks, oh, we must have a chatbot. Well, why do you really need it? If it goes back to when mobile apps first came in, everyone says we've got to have an app. What do you want it to do? Don't care. Got to have an app. And there's a little bit of that around at the moment. So you must have that business imperative, that challenge. And we haven't really talked about the AI strategy piece, but one of the things I do with all clients is make sure you understand the business objectives, what the challenges are, and everything you do must be aligned with those as well. Otherwise you're wasting money, but also you're never going to get the buy-in and the momentum of those programs if people can't see the value that's going to come out at the end of it. How's it going to help me? How's it going to help my organization?
So let's well, I think I'd like to talk about strategy. We'll maybe talk about that in a second, but just closing off this thing with the sensors and that sort of thing is what are the kind of I suppose I think the sort of sensors we've talked about are the kind of things that people can imagine, but what are some of the kind of the more off the wall pieces of data that people are using? So I mean, an example that isn't quite related to this, but kind of is that is basically having like little blimps with infrared cameras on them that people are flying around and looking at how much heat loss is from houses and that sort of thing. I mean, what are the sort of some of the more unusual ways in which people are getting data in order to analyze that?
Yeah, I mean the aerial stuff is interesting. So and drones sometimes get a bad name, but there's very good work being done looking at so there's not so drones, even satellite imagery as well. So if you've got satellite imagery, drone imagery of a neighborhood, and you've trained an AI system to recognize the different aspects within that, and particularly things like roofs and trees and manhole covers, those sorts of things, then you've got a very quick idea of any issues within your neighborhood. Insurance companies use this initially to for identifying flat roofs, for example. Flat roof is more of an insurance risk than a gabled roof. So you can see these pictures where the AI will kind of color in the different roofs and highlight the different things as well. So, and particularly trees can be a problem for housing associations in the properties that have gardens, etc. If the tree's overgrown, it might cause a risk. It might be blocking out light, etc. So those are the sorts of things that can be quite interesting as well, I think.
So because like I say, with all these things, you can. I think visual kind of AI is. I mean, we're only just scratching the surface of it now, because there are so much. It's so easy to get video.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the downside is I think video is probably one of the most expensive things to process in terms of compute.
Yes.
But at the same time, I suppose a lot of that can be mitigated by because really it's more overlaying photographs rather than necessarily video. That's where a lot of these things.
Yeah, again, it depends what you're trying to identify, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, again, there's the ethical questions around this as well. So, you know, particularly around privacy, you know, you could use CCTV cameras to identify antisocial behavior in your neighborhood, and you could train it to, you know, tell the difference between somebody, you know, walking along or doing, you know, whatever, against somebody, you know, doing something that is antisocial. You know, that's the training you can make it do, and you can, you know, but is that?
But it's like the big brother is watching you then, and and I think there's definitely a I mean, especially again without wanting to open up another huge can of worms, but the ethics of the ethics of AI is an enormous thing as well, isn't it? Because when you're starting to say I'm going to use an AI thing that's going to make decisions that affect someone's life, whether for good or bad, because and especially because AI is fallible. Like I say, if you're going to get someone accused of antisocial behaviour or something, or even just the fact that you're monitoring people, I mean, I think I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of us are comfortable with the idea that technology can help protect vulnerable people by recognizing when they need help, but people don't want to live in a world where we're spied on by robots to control us. And it's kind of keeping all the good parts, but not going down the road of some of the more sinister possibilities.
Yeah, and facial recognition technology is at the core of that, and you know, the technology isn't good enough yet for what people are using it for in the wild. You know, in you know, the Metropolitan Police use it here in London, and you know, it's just not good enough. And you know, I would campaign vociferously to you know, ban that for now, and you know, until we've got proof that it works well enough that innocent people aren't going to get targeted. But it's just not there yet. But you know, there's a thing, you know, one of the mantras I always use with AI is just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things you can do with AI, but they're just not the right thing to do. You know?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing with the facial recognition, because you know, a few years ago, there was a lot of like the internet conspiracy theorists were all like, oh, we're all going to have facial recognition. You know, the government's going to control us. The government isn't. You know, you're going to have to. You know, you can't wear your hoodie going out because you'll have to show your facial recognition. And now everyone's got to wear a face mask when they're out.
Yes.
And it's like everyone's saying, oh, the conspiracy theorists will go, oh, no, the government are making us wear face masks. It's like, you can't win, can you? So now we're all allowed to cover our faces, and the facial recognition won't work. It's like, no, that's bad as well.
They are working on FRT that will recognize people with masks on as well. They already got some results on that as well, which is interesting and frightening.
But so let's just one of the things we touched on, and we should probably, I mean, I know we're kind of well into this discussion now, but let's just talk a little bit about formulating an AI strategy, because that's obviously it's a big part of what you do, but also you know, I think AI, and I think you said this at the start when you introduced what you do, is that there's so many organizations, and okay, we started off talking about social housing and that sort of thing, because that's a specific problem area that I think we've both been involved in. But in general, you know, everyone's heard of AI now. Very few organizations, relatively speaking, are really using it in anger, and it's but we're at the point where the technology is really accessible, but it's almost the education of it's almost like an educational problem now of letting people know how they can you know, take advantage of it. So really, what's the approach you take to take people on that journey from pretty much knowing that AI is out there, and that's it, to I'm actually helping my organization get better with the use of AI technology.
Yeah, and you're right in that there's lots of people that think I should be using AI in my organization, or there might be opportunities for AI, but one, I don't really understand it, and secondly, even if I did, I wouldn't know where to start. So that's kind of that's the value that I can add, because it's part of that's around the education. So being able to explain artificial intelligence in non-technical terms that business people can understand. So it's around the capabilities, what it can do rather than how it does it. I think that's really, really important. And nobody, particularly if you're a senior manager, you're not going to implement something, you're not going to invest in something if you don't really understand what it is. That's probably dereliction of duty as well. So you have to get to a certain level of understanding. Again, not technical, but just appreciate what the technology can do before you're going to do that. So getting through that first stage is really, really important. Once you've done that, is then that second question of, well, how do we start? And as I said before, it's all about making sure that the AI is value led. So how does it help us achieve our business objectives? How does it help us meet the challenges that we got at the moment? And that alignment is really, really important. So the work that I do is once I've understood that, is then identifying the opportunities for AI within that organization that meet those objectives and challenges. And when I'm talking about AI as well, I'm talking about the full range. It's a very, very broad term, but you've got chatbots at one end, predictive analytics the other, and everything in between. So you can come up with 30 or 40 different opportunities for AI within the organization, and then you can start to prioritize those against business value, against ease of implementation, and then summarize that in a heat map and a business case and a roadmap, etc. And that's the strategy that tells you, this is the art of the possible for AI within my organization. This is how I can start to implement it. This is the vision that we've got. This is where we'll end up doing that. And also, because we've got this prioritized list, we know where to start. So what's the first 2 or 3 proof of concepts we need to do to test this out, make sure there's value within that, there's some signal in the data, we've got enough data, etc., to kind of take us forward.
And then it becomes as far as like the non-technical business people are concerned, it then just becomes a classic return on investment decision, doesn't it? But I think the thing with AI is that a lot of the, let's say, a lot of the normal technical investment things of getting a PC on everyone's desk and maybe getting workflow or getting everyone using a line of business system, all those things, that's all been done now. And it's like, well, where is the next big opportunity for return on investment? Where's the next how can organizations have a step change? And I think that's why AI is exciting, is because that is one of the main areas where you can get that step change. And there aren't many other areas of technology investment that can do that for you. I mean, obviously we work a lot in data platforms and that sort of thing, and there's the move to cloud and that sort of thing. But move to cloud is an incremental benefit. It's okay. We're kind of we're increasing our operational efficiency by 25%, but it's not that step change. It's not a 10x kind of change. Whereas and AI is one of the few technologies where we can sort of say that this is kind of 10x sort of change that you can have in the way you deliver what you do.
Exactly. And you've got to think, the benefit is potentially orders of magnitude greater than, if you look at robotic process automation, for example, that's all about arbitrage. It's about taking people out of a process, whereas AI is about augmentation. It's about augmenting people's capabilities, giving them deeper insights into their organization, helping them make better decisions. So if that's around helps them manage risk or helps them generate new revenue or whatever it is, those benefits are going to be much better than saying, yes, we can save 3 heads here or whatever. It's a different equation you're looking at.
And like I say, it's an opportunity equation as well. It's like I say, just making the same thing more efficient is okay. I mean, a lot of companies work off competitive advantage in terms of efficiency, but ultimately that kind of if everyone went down that route, ultimately it doesn't get you into a better place. It's just kind of internal deflation. Whereas if you look at that, like you say, how can you augment, and then there's like I say, it's growth and positive opportunities rather than let's just concentrate on efficiency, because it's yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I always talk to my clients about what's their ambition, what's their AI ambition, and it could be we just want to improve some processes, make them more efficient, which is fine. The bit I do ignore when they want to tick the AI box to say they've done it. Ignore them.
Everyone else at the golf club's got an AI.
Yeah,
one as well.
Yeah. So it could be from making some processes more efficient to we're going to fundamentally transform our business with AI, and all those kind of steps in between. But you need to understand that, the organization needs to understand that, because that will affect how, your first step on that journey will be different depending on which level of ambition you have. So you really need to understand that, and those sorts of conversations are really important within the business, because people haven't really thought about that. It is like we should be doing something with AI, but they haven't kind of thought beyond that, and it helps them with that art of the possible question. So actually, we could transform our business. Do we want to do that? Yes, we do. Or maybe no, let's leave that for a bit. We'll focus on this for now.
Yeah.
Really important conversations.
Or are we transforming our product? Or are we
exactly.
Yeah. So one thing on this that is, a lot of people I talk to are confused about the difference between a data strategy and an AI strategy. So if someone would say that to you, what would you say?
So the data, for me, the data strategy is around the organization and management of the data, and there's some technical aspects within that as well, infrastructure and stuff. AI is about the value you can get from that data, and the two are linked, but there's you're coming at it from different directions, I think. Yeah,
because I think that's the thing. Because obviously, it's almost like you need to have your data before you before you build your AI on it. But it is a very different focus, and I think to me, data strategy is far more organizational rather than AI is more how do we use this particular category of technology to solve business problems, whereas a data strategy is much more about how an organization as a whole has what's the attitude of your organization to data, and how can changing that change your business, and they're like I say, they're related, but they're different things.
And you can do them concurrently as well. So it's not the case that you have to get your data strategy done, completed, all your data cleaned and everything before you can even think about AI. That's not the case. I mean, it makes the AI strategy much easier, but there's still value you can do within your existing data, wherever it may sit. If it's on a spreadsheet on somebody's laptop, that's still data that you can potentially get some value out of. But you need to be thinking these two things.
You don't have to wait 5 years to sort your data strategy. Before you've actually start down the road of AI. So and again, I think we are almost out of time. But what are the is there anything else that you'd say that if to someone that's trying to get started, or trying to think about AI, or wants to have that AI vision, is that what are the big messages you kind of say to them to sort of say, well, these are the sort of things you should be considering about, these are the kind of the broad directions you should be at least trying to explore. Where is it where does someone start to just even think about getting the vision?
I mean, I think it just kind of gives some kind of big messages. One is don't believe the hype, in the words of Public Enemy. There is a lot of hype around AI. One of the things that I half jokingly say to people, I make AI boring for them, because we cut through all that sort of stuff. It's a tool you can use, so let's focus on that. Let's focus on the business value and ignore things like that. The other big message is going back to that ambition point, is think big and act small. So work out what your vision is, know where you're going, but do start small. So those proof of concepts are really important, because as well as getting stakeholder buy-in, momentum for AI within the organization, you're also testing out those things like do we have the right data? Is it the right quality? And
Yeah.
the first POC is going to be the most difficult because you're struggling with all those data questions first of all. But once you've done that, then everything else should flow from that as well. So it's those steps one by one that you're going through within that. I think if those are the big messages, I think that's what people should take.
No, and that's a good point, really, because when you've got all, because you do a data strategy, you come back and you sort of say, well, here's your 44 different opportunities for data, and they're all ranked. The really big return on investment might actually be the really risky ones as well.
Yeah.
And so what you're trying to say is get some successes under your belt first, which is pick something small that's low risk that you can kind of say, okay, if this doesn't work, it's not the end of the world, because we're just we're learning and we're doing it, and but then once we've done that, we can build on it and do something slightly bigger, slightly risky, but we've learned from that first one, and then onwards from there, rather than let's pick the thing that will make us billionaires. And we're going to put all the chips on that one. That's not a good place to start.
No, exactly. Yeah, and because you prioritize them by essentially business value and what I call ease of implementation, how easy is it to do, then you've always got that balance. There's going to be some high value, difficult to implement things which go into that pot, and you maybe want to start. There's an approach called riskiest assumption test. Excuse me. So if there is something big, there's lots of assumptions you'll have made. So let's find our riskiest assumption first of all. What can we do to test that? Right. Once we've understood that, what's the next riskiest one? And you go through until you've essentially eliminated all the real assumptions there, and then you know what you're going to do. So that's an approach to take as well.
Well, that's a really good insight. Now I'll bear that in mind, because that applies to basically any sort of project you can do.
Yeah,
that's not just an AI thing. That's any sort of project. Okay, so I think it's time for us to wrap up. But are there any so for everyone out there, thanks a lot for taking the time to do the podcast, because it's been a fantastic conversation, and I'd like to well, firstly, I'll point people at your book, because I think that's a really good place for them to start. But also, is there any other place they can follow you or follow what you're writing or anything like that?
Yeah, probably the best. Well, it's two websites. One is my business is called Greenhouse Intelligence, and the website is thegreenhouse.ai. So you can find out more about that AI strategy piece as well. From the writing and speaking point of view, got a more, I guess, personal website, ajburgess.com. And within that as well, there's a newsletter that I write every month called that Space Cadet Glow, which people can sign up for as well, which kind of got AI and culture and psychology stuff on it as well.
Excellent. Yeah, so hopefully you'll get some more sign-ups from that, and thanks a lot for being on the podcast today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Andrew. Take care.
Thanks, Andrew.